Okay, so in this session we'll be looking at how to deliver, whoopsies, I must sort out my notes here, how to deliver heritage interpretation. We're going to focus specifically on the writing of labels, which seems very, very specific, but there is quite a craft to it, and there's many different ways and approaches which we will discuss today. So the points that we'll cover will also be useful for any form of, let's say, interpretive writing, be it an article for your local newspaper, or perhaps you've got your organisation has an online newsletter to its database. So all of these principles that we'll talk about in relation to object labels or what we call, I guess, text interpretives, it's a bit jargony that term, will help you build a practice and expand your existing practice of writing about your archive and about your collections. Okay, so why exhibition text? So exhibition texts communicate mainly the storyline and the key messages, as you know. So it has different functions. So when we're thinking about, is it somebody you know? No?
Sort of.
Sort of? Anyway, so interesting.
Coming up, maybe.
Yeah. So the text that you write has different functions and different purposes. So we can have a look and think about, is our text to inform? Is it to provoke, question, instruct? Perhaps it's more to orient people or to provide them with background context. So one approach is to create multiple layers of text through a label hierarchy. So kind of much like the contents page of a book, having different subject kind of headings for different levels of information. And that can help provide different access points to your content and actually help you interest different types of people who might come to see your exhibition or display. So we'll get to that label hierarchy bit in a moment. So we'll also be looking at how you might choose your approach to communication, so your approach to writing. Will it be didactic? So what I mean by that is meaning transmitted when a person reads your label, transmission, or a constructivist approach. Meaning, I mean, you probably know quite a bit about constructivist learning theory in the education context, which basically means that meaning is constructed or meaning is assembled kind of more like a puzzle instead of just kind of given. All right, so some considerations to think about when crafting your exhibition texts. So most people are standing when they're reading exhibition texts, and I think sometimes when we get really into content and really into writing about a topic that we are excited about, we can sometimes forget that people are standing, and so that means that people do get fatigued quite easily if they're trying to focus on the text. And I'm sure you've heard of the term, and perhaps you've even experienced yourself this concept of museum fatigue, looking and standing and reading and trying to intake information. We also know that people have very short attention spans. I'm sure you know that, judging by how you might have observed people, go through your archive or look at your displays, things like that. So before writing a piece of text for an exhibition, such as a label or a text panel here, you want to consider, is there another way to communicate this message? Perhaps this message could be better communicated in a diagram, or the phrase, picture says 1,000 words, which it doesn't always say 1,000 words, but some, carefully selected images can convey, messages instead of text. There's also increasingly, as we touched on earlier, audio tours or other means of communicating storyline. You might have an in-person tour instead of really, really long or lengthy text. Okay. And with every piece of text, we should be considering the so what. So what of this piece of information or this piece of writing? Why does it matter? And so that's, when you're thinking about that, that's quite a personal, reflective question. It's okay, well, why does it matter to me? Why might it matter to somebody else? And that points you back to your relevance. And what is that line of relevance that you are using to connect your information or your stories with the actual visitor. So in an environmental context, it might be the ocean is an incredible resource. We need to look after the ocean, and then the way you're connecting it back to your audience is we need to look after the ocean because the ocean sustains us. That's kind of the grab. Anyway, that's not a very good example, but we'll get to some better. That was an off the cuff. We'll get to some better examples in a moment. So, following some steps to interpretive label writing. So step 1 is to gather your research. So when you've collected your exhibition research, so you've done some cultural soup research about what other people have done in that space, you've done some thematic research about some of the ideas which might connect your collections into a theme which could be presented in an exhibition or small display. And then you'll have done some object research about the individual items. You don't have to necessarily do object research about every single item that might be featured in your exhibition, because that's going to take a long time. But you might like to select some objects which you might do a bit more research on, or you might already have that research somewhere in your collection. What do you call it in archives? Collection management database or archive management database? Yeah, you might already have information that you can use there. So it's just a matter of gathering that. Then you want to be able to determine your information hierarchy. And so you've got a little handout there from the earlier session. So there's a table on one side, and there's another table on the other side, and it's got exhibition title and a few different categories and some word counts. So we'll discuss this in a little bit more. But what I would recommend for your own practice, if you're not already doing this, and for your own archive, is develop your own text, content or information hierarchy. What are the types of different labels that you might like to use, and what word count or word limit might you assign to those different categories? Okay, step 4 will be drafting your text, and step 5 is refine, edit and repeat. So we'll go through all these steps. Okay, so thinking about label hierarchies. So in this exhibition, I can immediately see that we've got at least 2 label hierarchies going on. So we've got these panels, which look to me like kind of theme panels, and then we've also got the individual object labels going on there. So on this chart, I've kind of mapped that text that you've got on your handout into different categories from what I call a micro exhibition. Maybe that's just one showcase that you might change throughout the year. Small exhibition, maybe that's a few more panels, maybe you've got a little corner at your archive or wherever you're located. And then medium to large, so much more objects, so this would be a medium to large exhibition here. So for every exhibition you're going to obviously need your title. So that's something that's common across whatever exhibition you're doing, even if it's just a small showcase. Maybe have 3 or 4 items, I'd still recommend that you give it a title, because your title can help you brand and actually connect the content with audiences and gives you kind of a context to talk about it. Okay, you might have you'll have introductory text. So you'll have this for the most important messages for people to know about what they are experiencing and viewing when they're looking at your exhibition. So I think there's an intro text label for this show up the front there. I should have had a look at it in break. Yes?
Will we be able to get a copy of your...
Yes. So we'll send it round via email so you can all actually do it, because it's very hard to read at that small size. And these word limits, there's a lot of different recommendations. People say it should only be 50 words, it should only be 80 words. So you can basically set your own word counts and word limits. Find what works for you. This is just what I've set up for the library and what seems to be working over next door, but your context might be slightly different. Okay, if your display or collection has a specific collection originator, you might actually want to introduce them as a separate label or a separate kind of panel. So, for example, an exhibition that I did recently for the library this year was Izzy Orloff's photographic collection, turn of the century, 1919, around he was taking photographs of Perth and Fremantle. And so as part of this exhibition, I introduced Izzy, who he was, what's his background. He came as a migrant from Israel and came over to Western Australia before World War II, actually. So you might want to introduce a specific character. But none of these are compulsory. Probably the only compulsory ones I would say are exhibition title and then your tombstone labels, which would be that basic ID information so that people know that they can ask you, how do I find out more about that? It's just to orient people and to give people the required context. Okay, theme text. So expands on a topic introduced in the exhibition introduction and or collection introduction, that's a bit wordy. So your theme text might elaborate on some of the ideas or concepts that you want to explore in the exhibition. So for the Izzy Orloff exhibition that I worked on, one of the themes was Izzy's beach. He really loved to photograph the beach, people bathing and swimming. Ironically, there was never any photographs of him at the beach. He was always the observer. So that was one theme. Another theme of this exhibition, so in my text I talked a bit about, what his images of the beach depicted and why he was drawn to the beach. Another example of the theme text for that exhibition was, I talked about how he was very connected with the Fremantle ports. So the topic of that label was, or theme label was, Port of Ports or something like that. Fremantle ports, he observed, he went to the ports to see the boats coming in, and then he was often called on by the customs men to assist with new migrant arrivals and photographing their passports, them for their passport photos, but also he was quite a philanthropic gentleman and helped a bit because he knew Yiddish and Hebrew and he knew a bit of Russian, and so he could help translate. So there's this whole kind of understanding of this person captured through this idea of Fremantle ports. So there's a couple more themes of that exhibition, but you get the idea. So you're unpacking different kind of aspects of a particular collection. If it was, say, an exhibition that covered maybe not one specific collection, but multiple collections, your theme might be, we did one a couple of years ago called Creating Perth. One of the themes was how European maps have shaped the city and have shaped our understanding of Perth City as it is. So next we're looking at a group object label. So this is one that I find particularly useful for small exhibitions and displays, because you might not want to write an individual label for every single thing, and you don't have to, apart from the tombstone label, the biographical and those types of details. So your group object label would say, these 3 toilet paper diaries are examples of diaries from prisoners of war, and you talk about them more in a general sense, giving specific references to obviously the individual items that people can see there, but not having to write, this is a toilet paper diary, this is a toilet paper diary, because that might be a bit repetitive. So you can pick and mix the ones that are going to work for you and for your context. As I said, it's not an exhaustive framework, but I find this sort of a hierarchy generally can work for most things. I do a lot of kids exhibitions at the State Library, so taking photographs and working out how can we create levels of interactivity for younger audiences, particularly primary school. So for that, to create kids labels, we did an exhibition a little while ago that was called See My Hat, and it was all about historic photographs of people wearing hats, different types of hats. And so the kids' label was, see my hat when I am dressed as a fireman. And so there was kind of different cues that the kids could use to actually put on a hat. Anyway, that was a really fun one. Obviously, some exhibitions will have instructional text, which might be, press this button to hear X, or depending on whatever your exhibition is. This is where I'd also classify many exhibitions might need a cultural warning, especially if they contain photographs or images which may have be a sensitive nature to Indigenous persons, particularly if they contain deceased persons. And generally, if it's pre-1955, we can assume that probably people are deceased. Not really, but anyway. Okay, so moving on. So storyline, we'll go back to this example, Izzy Orloff. So this is an example, and I've chosen examples of texts that I've written, not because I think that they're the best in the world. I think we can always improve. But I've chosen them because I didn't have to ask anyone else permission to actually kind of interrogate them, and it wouldn't offend anyone else. Okay, so this is the Izzy exhibition, which I was talking about before. This is my introductory statement. So providing a broad context of what people are going to see in the exhibition. So it's really important that your introductory text actually describes some aspect of what people will see there, to give them the context so that it feels really connected to what's on kind of display and the here and now experience. Sometimes you'll get very familiar, you've probably read a lot of exhibition text yourselves, and sometimes you kind of come up to a label or a piece of text and it's like, hang on a minute, how is that related to that? So you want immediately to be able to establish a connection that your text is related to the here and now. So you can see there, that's just a really brief description there. Okay, this is my theme label. So I think I had about 4 different themes for this exhibition, and these were written as little wall texts alongside photographs. Definitely not perfect, could do with more editing, I'm sure. But talking about what some of the photos contain, but not in a way that says these are all, beach photos. I'm pointing to some of the action and getting people to hopefully be like, oh, okay, strike a pose. Which one's that? Let's have a look. So looking at your collections and what interests you out of that, and then try and find ways to weave that in as a hook. Because a person is not going to read all the text in your exhibition, probably, unless they're an enthusiast, or what was that word? We had a word from last session, nostalgia nutter or something like that. Or,
Local history nutter.
Yes. So if they're really interested, they will, obviously, but most people probably won't. So you want your text to be able to be read on its own and without necessarily reading any other context. So each label should be able to be treated on its own and understood on its own. So it's good to avoid cross-referencing between labels per se. Obviously, you can cross-reference between what's on display. Okay, now over here as well, this is what I would call an extended object label. So that, I think, is about 100 and something words. But I think on my hierarchy, I've allowed 150 words or something for extended object label. So you can see this is the tombstone aspects, what we would find on the tombstone of the photograph, if it had one.
Hopefully the photo is bigger than the...
Yes, I do apologise. I should have brought that up really, that really big. I think I had a bit of energy just now with that orange juice. That was lovely. Okay, but the first thing we're talking about is we're relating, if possible, trying to relate the first couple of sentences directly to the picture or directly to the item. So it's interesting because when I look at this photo, I'm like, oh, that's just an interesting streetscape. Like, there's nothing going on there. But if you actually look really closely, there is little people standing, but we can't see in that resolution, but I'll bring up the big one later. So we're beginning with people are rarely absent from Izzy's photographs of streetscapes. Oh, but there's no people there, is there? And then they look closer. So you're encouraging, you're drawing out the kind of richness of your collections. And, you might not have a photograph on display. You might have a say a manuscript or a diary. So you might actually be referencing maybe a little inscription or something that's actually in the diary. So use the wealth of what you've got in your object or in your archive to actually give you stimulus for writing, because that's the way you can help make it more interesting. Okay, so writing this way can actually really help you scaffold the different types of your experiences that you will create for your kind of interpretive activities. So, for example, I wrote this content for the exhibition, and I also did a tour taking people around. And so having this text written in this way enabled me to go, okay, I know what point I'm going to be talking about with the visitors today. We're going to be going and I'm going to be asking them, are there any people in this photograph? What can you see? So we're immediately starting to talk about the actual object itself. Okay. So this is a fictitious exhibition that I've developed quite a while ago about hair. Seems to be quite a reoccurring theme in my presentations.
Is that meant to be like the Hollywood show hair?
Maybe. Yeah, that would be good. I mean, this is an exhibition that I would love to do for the National Gallery of Victoria, but they haven't employed me yet. Okay, so going back to two different approaches, we've got a didactic approach, which is focused more on information transmission, and then we've got a constructivist approach, which is focused more on information assembly. And when I say that, we're talking about how the person reading it consumes it. Here they're absorbing the content. Here they are kind of, working things out. There's questions. You'll notice other differences between these two styles of writing. We've got, using questions. It's a bit more, doesn't know everything. It's kind of a bit more suggestive, versus this one saying, a bit more information kind of based. And to be honest, when I write content for exhibitions, in different contexts, you're dealing with what's the organisation kind of style, or how does the organisation kind of write about itself? And often that can actually sort of set the tone for how you write in your about your exhibitions or in your archive context. So, to be honest, I would like to be writing more of this style because I think it's really fun and suggestive. But where the library at is now, in the moment, I write more in this style, which is a bit more didactic and a bit more focused on information, because it's all about balance, isn't it? We're trying to balance the needs of audience, the kind of the people who are like, I just want to seek expert information and libraries should know the truth and blah, 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 versus a kind of a more, perhaps, constructivist theories in education have been more popular, in more recent kind of years. So this sort of suiting a more high school aged kind of group. Anyway, two different approaches. Again here, I got very obsessed with hair. Okay, so morning jury, again, didactic approach. It's more descriptive, more background information. Again, these are not perfect. I just noticed these. But it's, asking more reflective, asking people to reflect. So when you're writing your text, you could experiment with a few different styles and see what works for you. See how people respond. If you tried writing in this style, how would it go down? This is, you might already be writing in a similar style to this, as I think it comes a bit more intuitively. Well, for me anyway. Don't know about you. Have to work a bit harder when I write like that. Anyway, just examples to provide you with a bit of context. So I definitely recommend you could even revisit some old labels that you've written and say, how might I make that maybe a more constructivist approach, or how might I make that a didactic approach, and see where your style of writing fits in. There's no right or wrong, many different ways, many different methods. Okay, so we're going to consider the purpose of each word and sentence and each paragraph in our writing. So also what I find is really helpful is when you read the text out loud. You'll see where the stumbling points are and where you can increase clarity. If you have access to a 12-year-old, I would recommend asking them to help. Yes, yeah, asking them to help you read it, because there's many different theories around what reading age or what, where should you pitch your writing and your text. A lot of different people say different things. What I've come across commonly is pitch it at a 12-year-old age. And that's not a blanket rule. Some things might, be for a more specialised or technical audience, in which case you'd have more technical and specialist language. But I think the important thing is to just consider your audience and trial and test and see how you go. Okay, so external editor would highly recommend, and that doesn't necessarily mean you pay someone because, I don't know, maybe you know some external editors. I often get several colleagues to test the readability, to edit, to refine, and I think that's, one of the things that is a really good part about being part of a community. You've got colleagues here, even if there's no one in your staff or team that you think, maybe you don't want to bother them because they're really busy with whatever, you can ask your colleagues here and hopefully they'll be able to help and read your text. Okay, so think about how much jargon is in your text. There's a great phrase that I sometimes see in labels. I can't even remember what it is now, but it'll come to me later. It's a common phrase. So think about, does the average person know what this word means? Doesn't mean to don't include that word. We don't want to dumb it down. We want to just make sure that the information is there so that people can understand and so that they don't feel alienated. Because sometimes what can happen, unfortunately, is if people come up, read a text, it's like they're going to go to the effort of standing here reading a text, and they come across a word, maybe it makes them, that they don't know, maybe it makes them feel bad about themselves, and then they don't want to finish reading. I don't know, that could be a fragile issue, but anyway, but I don't know. Sometimes it can affect people like that, so there's subtle things. Okay, and think about your audience. Stand up when you read your captions as well, because if you think it's, short enough, then you stand up and read it. You might even like to do a printout and put it on the wall and then read it and see how long you can concentrate in that space for. If you're in our office, somebody will interrupt you. Anyway, okay. So this is, again, here. This is a Bible that we displayed a long time ago. It's that picture that I showed you in the last session. Here's the hair locks, or the hair relics. I think there was 5. 1, 2, 3, 5. Anyway, so I wrote this label many, many years ago, and I dredged it up for this exhibition because I was curious, and I would definitely write that differently today. It's very, I don't even know what's going on here. There's something. There's that quote. It's not that clear. Maybe the first sentence is okay. I don't know. It's still a bit long. Anyway,
could you just have it so there's a gap in between, so there's 2 paragraphs?
Yeah, you could definitely. Yep, we could do that. There's a lot of changes that we could make. So I think that is actually a worthwhile activity, as painful as it is. Go back and look at some earlier pieces that you've written and go, okay, well, what would I change now to make that piece a bit more accessible? And so I didn't get very far, but I tried to have a look at it again. And I tried to write it in a bit more of a constructivist way, with a few more questions, things like that. Obviously, I didn't spend very long on this, so I could change it a lot more. And really kind of refine it and craft it. It is one of those things, is how long is a piece of string? When is the text ever going to be written, So obviously, I don't know, take as long as you can afford to spend on it. But I think it's really worthwhile for all of your practice, because your job, or part of your role and part of my role, is about how we communicate the value of heritage, and so and collections, and how we connect them with our audiences. So the more you can practice, the better, and you can really refine your craft and become really proud of the stuff that you're writing, especially if you get feedback via social media. So as I said, constructivist didactic, just 2 approaches. There's many books. You can probably read about 11 different approaches, but we might have to do a whole week on those, and I can give some references to some books if you'd like to read about this further. So there's one text which is by Cyril, I think his name is. Anyway, I've got it in the end of the references. And it's all linguistics. It talks about the order of language and how that affects meaning. It was almost a bit, oh, that's a bit much for me. But some people would really get a lot out of a book like that. Okay. Just check how we're going for time. Okay. Great. So, making and designing labels. This is something that you probably have been doing. Who does exhibitions quite regularly as part of their job or displays? Yeah, yeah. And for everybody else, is kind of like something you might be interested in going to, or just interested in learning about more? Yeah. Okay. Cool. So, just some general kind of thoughts. I think, as with the exhibition text hierarchy, you can take a framework like that and work out, okay, how might I apply this to my collections and to my archives to give that level of consistency and to ensure that the same kind of level of, I guess, clarity is provided to all of the little exhibitions and projects that you work on. So just as you would, have a consistency in approach to your text and, the amount of words on your labels without being, too precious about it. 101 words. None of your visitors are going to count the number of words in a label. So I would recommend also adopting a consistent approach to the size and the actual appearance of the label. And when you have a hierarchy like this, it actually makes it a lot easier when you're kind of deciphering how am I going to put all of these different storylines, how am I going to build them together to create and assemble something that's, meaningful and share something for the audiences. You can sort of, use the, thank you very much, you can also use the, the hierarchy to kind of mix and match and go, okay, maybe that collection story fits in as a theme, or maybe it's better as a group object because it's not as overarching as you initially thought it was. Okay. So I've set a preferred size for tombstone basic labels at the library, and that's 160 by 120. I wish I should have brought some samples, which I might get at lunchtime, which is about this big by this big. Again, there's a standard size that you can see being applied here as well. So generally, I find that I often outsource the printing of labels, which is obviously a cost, but it's about kind of weighing up the cost. If I was to cut all my own labels, they probably wouldn't be straight, number one, and it might take me 3 hours, depending on how many there were to do. So it's about, weighing up the different types of costs. So if outsourcing, I'd be looking at products such as foam core, gator board, 4X, vinyl lettering, or vinyl decal. And so in that exhibition, you can see that's a vinyl decal on a kind of wall surface. So lots of different products out there. Can make friends with your printers. Yes.
What sort of cost was it just for one big panel? Yeah,
okay, so decal, I can fairly confidently tell you that any sort of vinyl that you might apply directly to a wall will cost you about $150 per square metre. That's including installation, usually. There are cheaper products, so this is I think that's a foam core with an edge wrap, so you get that nice neat edge. So I don't know how much it costs, but foam core edge wrap is fairly affordable. So if I got 30 labels at my size, I know that would probably cost me $200. So when I'm weighing up that, okay, what's my hourly rate? How much does it cost? It's sometimes cheaper to outsource. But if you're producing in-house, sometimes simple is better. So sometimes just a card and kind of a nice thick GSM, maybe a 350 GSM, can actually do the job really neatly and give you a really neat look. I used to cut foam core labels for the library and I could never get it straight and I was never happy. So I found I could just cut this cardboard on a guillotine. Done. Easy. So find out what works for you. You can also use clear shipping labels. You can buy these from Officeworks. You can stick them directly to a wall, or you can stick them to your cards. You can recycle those cards. So you can do a few things there. So that's, I'd say that's like a foam core or a 4x board or something there. Right, so these are examples of a gator board label. So that's my size there in a little showcase display. Okay, over here, this is a label that's actually at the art gallery. Now, thank you, we're up to questions, that's great. And this is, they've definitely chosen a larger label size. Possibly, I think they've had feedback that people couldn't read the text or things like that. So I've definitely noticed in recent years they've made their labels larger. So experiment. Some people say you must use size 18 font. Like I think it's not really that helpful rules like that. You just need to see what your feedback is and see how you go. Okay, this is at the museum. So when I worked on the installation project at the museum, New Museum Boulevard, so please excuse the labels and that, all of the cases, this is in progress. So they favoured this bar style label. So thinking about your labels as also image opportunity panels if you run them along the base of your showcase or your wall, wherever you've got them going on. Okay, again another one. Sometimes they use numbers. Please excuse the numbers 6, 7 and little tokens. They're not in place yet, but little number tokens there. So what I would recommend is that whenever you're out and about, read other people's labels, see how they write them, try to identify the approach and take pictures of ones you like. I wish that I had taken more photos of the labels that I thought were good, so I'd have a bank that I could refer back to. One of the advantages... Yes?
Carina, have you seen ones that are Braille included?
Yes, they are excellent. Very good. Yeah, so some printers will do, not all printers, but some printers will do the Braille kind of labels for you. Yes?
Well, I was wondering what your favourite sans serif font is.
At the moment, it's pretty standard. It's Helvetica. Anyway, okay. So there's a lot of different resources available online. I also wanted to mention some other opportunities for longer format content writing. So the writing that you do for labels, you can put out through multiple formats. You can rinse and repeat. There's no harm in using the same text if you're happy with the way you've written it. And you can import through Collections WA, which I'm sure some of you might be familiar with. If not, check it out online. You might, as an organisation, be able to sign up to Collections WA to help share your stories. There's Google Arts and Culture, which again is a kind of a sign-up system where museums, archives and galleries can sign up and produce content for that site. And there's also products such as Adobe Spark. So if your organisation has an Adobe licence, you might be able to access this program, which allows you to create visual format kind of little mini websites that are about collection stories. And if the internet works, I'll show a bit later, maybe in question time. So it's an example of Google Culture Institute in Collections WA. Okay, so some further reading texts. I'd recommend all of these. The Sorel is the Ravelli, not to be confused with ravioli. That's a very ultra-linguistic one, which is all about the meaning of words and the order of words and syntax and all of those things that I don't quite understand. But there's lots of information there. So just to reiterate, determine what your hook is. And that might be something visual that you can actually see in the object or in the item. Use an active and conversational language where possible. You can integrate images and graphics, such as the examples from the museum here, if that might work for you. See how it goes. And shorter is still better, but for your longer format, you can explore a lot of different online resources.